entrepreneur, businessman, author, and also pacifist. He cared a lot about peace. And he invented, do you know what he invented? Oh, good, the dynamite. Yeah, and when he died in December 1896, so then he had given away all his money to this Nobel Prize. And it was all about making the world better by science, literature, and peace. And here today, we have two fantastic persons who have really made some great things for the world. And I think you are excited to meet them, aren't you? And so, please, will you help me out? Because you are 2,500 people here. So, and you must help me, okay? Are you ready for that? Yes. Are you ready? Yes. I can't hear you. Are you ready? Yes. Okay, so let's give a warm hand to the Nobel laureates. And, okay, let's start. Okay. So, this is Professor Thomas Lindahl, who is, you can see here, Nobel laureate in chemistry of 2015. And also we have Professor Richard J. Roberts, and he was the laureate in physiology or medicine 1993. And physiology or medicine, why is it called that actually?
I don't know.
You don't know? Okay, so, but let's start by just asking you, why did you get the prize, actually? Can you explain it very easy?
So I got the prize for discovering that genes, the DNA inside higher organisms, individuals like yourself, is laid out somewhat differently from genes in bacteria. In bacteria, a gene is just a linear piece of DNA. You start reading it here, and you continue reading it until the end. You then make a copy of that into a molecule called RNA, a messenger RNA, and that then takes the sequence of this gene, takes it to a ribosome, which then translates it 3 bases at a time into a protein. In higher organisms, we discovered that that didn't take place. That was not the way that things went. There was an intermediate step. Because the gene, instead of being just a linear piece of DNA, was actually extremely long. And there were little bits and pieces that made sense along the way, but there were a lot of intervening pieces that didn't make sense, that had to be removed. And so what happened when the RNA was made, it made a complete copy of the whole gene, but then it was cut and spliced together in exactly the way that a movie is made to get something that made sense. If you know how movies are made, the producer will look at a scene, make a scene, shoot a scene, then shoot another one, then another one, and an editor will come along and cut the film so that when you see it on the movie screen, it looks as though it's a continuous piece of action, even though it was filmed in separate locations. And that is how you process RNA inside all higher organisms. And it was a very nice discovery to make for many reasons. One was no one had predicted it. And of course, the essence of doing research, the essence of discovery, is to see something for the first time that no one else has ever seen. And the thrill of that is fantastic. And I'm sure you can all relate to that, because when you were very young, you were looking around and you saw things that you had never seen before. And so you made discoveries all the time. And I'm fortunate, I'm getting rather old now, but I still make discoveries all the time, which is why it's awfully nice to be a researcher.
Thank you. I think that was a pretty good explanation. What do you think? So, and Thomas. I will actually, because I will call him Thomas, because we come from Sweden, both of us, just like Alfred Nobel. But you're certainly an international person, so you don't live in Sweden anymore. But can you please tell us a little bit about why you got the prize?
I have a bit of a head cold, so I hope you can hear me. The reason I got the prize was that I investigated DNA, which carries the genetic information from your parents to yourself, for example. And it's obvious that this should be a very stable entity. I focused on the problem that as a macromolecule, the DNA is not particularly stable. The reason for that is that it has to have high fidelity on copying. And you can't achieve both that and chemical stability at the same time. This means that the DNA in our cells is damaged all the time in ways that we can't avoid from water and from oxygen in our cells. And we can't have a cell without oxygen or water, so there's no way of avoiding this continuous DNA damage. And this damage reaches such level that something has to be done. So that's what we investigated. We found no mechanisms that continuously repair the DNA. So when the base is damaged and potentially mutagenic, it's cut out and replaced by an excision repair mechanism with the correct material. And the way to know what to put in there is to read the complementary strand of the DNA. So it's very important for that point of view to have a double-stranded DNA. So if one of the strands gets damaged, you can use the other strand as a template for DNA repair.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. Very good explanation. So the Nobel Prize is all about making things better for mankind. So in one sentence, what would you describe that your achievements has made for the benefit of mankind? If you just say it very easy in one sentence.
Well, I'm not sure I can do it in one sentence.
Oh, please try. Okay?
But the discovery I made is a very basic discovery. And so for anyone who wants to try to interpret DNA, which a lot of people do these days, you have to know how the genes are organized and which bits make sense and which don't make sense. And so in that sense, my discovery enabled the easier analysis of DNA to understand what it was doing.
Okay, in almost one sentence. Yeah, okay, Thomas, give it a go. One sentence. How did this make the world better?
There is an important connection between aging and DNA repair. Since our DNA is getting damaged, we have to repair it, otherwise we would have premature aging. And there are now inherited diseases detected which are due to DNA repair defects and which lead to premature aging. So we want to understand aging, not to get eternal life, but to have a good, comfortable old age.
Okay, thank you. Not eternal life, but why not? Maybe, why not eternal life, Thomas? Can you please make some new knowledge how to get that?
Well, the Earth would be very overpopulated very soon if everybody died. I think the biological system we have is much better.
Okay.
Where you live through your children and grandchildren and perhaps through your achievements.
Okay, let's do it like that. So there are, you are between, how many of you are, how old are the oldest in the audience? Are somebody 18? 17? Can you hold up your hand if you're 17? And 16 years old? And 15? And 14? 13? 12? 11? Okay, so, you are very young and you're in school. And so, Rich, how are you as a student in school? Describe when you were about their age.
Well, I was a reasonable student. I wouldn't say I was the best student. I was very good at mathematics and I loved mathematics. I liked most subjects, provided there was a good teacher teaching it. I was not very happy when there was a bad teacher present. So, for instance, by the time I was 11 or 12, I decided I didn't like physics at all because we had a terrible teacher. But later on, I discovered that physics was actually okay, but it was really too late. By the time I went to university, then we had a good physics teacher, and that was okay. But I think it was interesting. I was always in the top 5 or 6 in my class, and this is from a smaller class than you may experience. This was in a class of 30 children. But that was good enough. I didn't feel I had to be at the top of the class. And I enjoyed school until it became boring. And I rather found it boring by the time I was about 16 and actually stopped going for a while, which didn't appeal so much to the teachers. They didn't think this was such a good thing. But I actually spent time away from school playing a game called billiards and snooker. You may know of these. I became very good at this as a result of doing that instead of going to school. But then I got caught, and I thought I was going to be thrown out of school. But I went to audition to become a professional billiards player, actually. But then the headmaster relented and said, well, I could go back to school, and so that's what I did, and the rest is history, I guess. But I always felt I missed a really good opportunity there. I could have been a professional billiards player and become really famous.
Okay, so you said that it worked out well when you had good teachers, but when you had some bad teachers, can you tell me something about someone and how you handled that? Did you handle it just by staying at home, or?
No. So, you have to be of a certain age before you can just stay home and not go. And so if you had a bad teacher, in my case, if I had a bad teacher, I would just think about something else or do something else. I've always loved puzzles and games and so on. Many of you probably know Sudokus and crosswords, this sort of thing. And so I would just do games while the teacher was teaching and hope that when the exams came, I had picked up enough to pass. But to be honest, I didn't really care all that much. I hated history, never liked history. For one thing, I don't have a very good memory, and the way that history was taught required just regurgitating dates, and that had no interest. And I think I was also aware that history is a very fluid subject because it's always being rewritten. Whoever's won the last war tends to rewrite the history. And so whatever you read in the history textbooks, you always have to be a little bit careful about how you interpret it, because it may not be so accurate. But I'd just find something else to do.
Yeah, good. Okay, so Thomas, I think you told me about a bad experience with a teacher. Will you, and some really good experiences too. Will you please tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it happens to all of us, but in my case, I was interested in too many other things. I played music, I was interested in botany and would go on excursions to look for certain wild orchids and so on. and that interfered with my schoolwork. But you broaden your mind by doing that. I had a teacher in one subject who didn't like me, and I didn't like him. So at the end of the year, he decided to fail me. The ironic thing is that the topic was chemistry. What is amusing today is that I probably have the doubtful distinction of being the only Nobel Prize winner in chemistry who has failed the subject in high school.
So, what can we learn from that? It's always a way to come back, and if you fail, you can do something good about it, and you can also get a Nobel Prize in exactly that subject.
I
So,
wouldn't have been able to do it without changing teacher. And I got a very good, inspiring teacher, and she stimulated my interest in chemistry, and that was essential.
okay. So, do we have any teachers here? Can the teachers please stand up so we can see you? Okay, teachers, now you listen to Thomas, okay? So, good luck. Okay, you can sit down again.
Thank you, teachers. You are essential.
So teachers are super important. You are the most important persons to make these all young persons interested in knowing more. So, so talking about like things that can go wrong, it's not easy to learn so much that you have done, of course. So did you have any rough times when you were studying, and how did you overcome it? Thomas, did you have any time in your education where it was quite tough?
When you start doing science, it comes as an unpleasant surprise that, in contrast to class experiments, most of the experiments you do just won't work because they are not designed correctly. Nature is smarter than you are, and you probably do the experiment, if we exclude the trivial case that you're technically incompetent, even if you have done it right, you might get the result that you don't expect. And that's very important in science. I think Rich is an excellent example of that. His outstanding discovery had actually been seen by other people, but they just shook their heads. Rich tried to understand, why do these results look so crazy? Nature is telling me something here. It's very important to keep an open mind, not just if things don't work out the way you had thought they should work out. It might mean something important.
Okay, so keep an open mind and never stop being curious. That's a good way. So Rich, have you had some challenges during your education? You told us that you were playing pool for a while, but is it some point in your education that it was harder than?
Well, when you're 18, you take advanced level exams, A-levels, and you need to pass those in order to go on to university. The first year I took them, I failed physics, which meant I had to repeat the third year and the sixth form, and that meant I could not go to Oxford or Cambridge, for instance. Not that I had a great desire to do so, but it just became impossible. And I failed physics, of course. This was the one that I didn't like. So anyway, so I did this extra year, and then went to university, went to Sheffield University, which at the time had the best chemistry program. And I would just echo something that Thomas said, that one of the things that happens whenever you're doing experiments, and I think it's true when you're starting businesses, when you're doing almost anything new in life, you do the best you can, but sometimes you fail. And failure usually comes because of two reasons. One is, in an experimental case, you just didn't plan the experiment properly, or you spat in the test tube, or you did something silly, you dropped the reagents on the ground, but there were some technical reasons. But very often you will plan an experiment and everything is done perfectly, but you don't get the result you expect. And when students come and tell you about this, they often say, oh, I did the experiment and it failed. Well, for me, this is the very best thing I like to hear. I like to hear that someone failed when they were doing something, because either it means they did it wrong, or nature really is trying to tell you something. And in the case of, say, failure, if you're doing your homework, life is trying to tell you something. You just didn't do something properly. If you do it properly, then usually it will work. And in a situation of research where nature is trying to tell you something, then this is exactly as Thomas said, you have to go on and find out why it didn't work the way you were expecting it to. And I will almost guarantee when that happens, if you've done all the experiments properly, you will discover something. Maybe a big discovery, maybe a little discovery. It may not be anything terribly important, but nevertheless it's a discovery. And that is why we do science. That's why Thomas does science. It's why I do it, because we're always hoping that we're going to make a discovery. Not hoping to win a Nobel Prize, just to make a discovery. And every so often, one of those discoveries is so big that the rest of the world thinks it's worth a Nobel Prize, or in particular the Swedes think it's worth a Nobel Prize. But it's not something that you can ever aspire to. You can't say, oh, I'm going to do these wonderful experiments and win a Nobel Prize, because it really is luck that you're doing the experiment that leads to the big discovery. You never know when the really big discovery is going to come.
So it's driven more by curiosity than by achieving a Nobel Prize.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
So before we let the students ask questions, and you have promised me to ask many questions, didn't you? Yeah. Okay. Good. So I just wanted to know your take on what does it take to be good in school, a good student? Like, is it hard work, passion, grit, goals, motivation? What to be a student? What should you focus on to really get the best out of your education? What do you say, Rich? Do you want to start?
Well, in my case, as soon as you find something that you really like, in my case it's chemistry or mathematics or whatever, then it becomes very easy to study it. And in addition to doing sort of the standard course, the standard homework and the assignments that you're given, it's always good to read outside of the subject a little bit and find out a little more and maybe go ahead of where the class is. I've always found that to be a very good way of dealing with things. But of course you always end up in these courses where there is plenty of stuff that's boring. And my approach to that has always been to do just enough to get by. Don't really spend huge amounts of time trying to memorize stuff that is boring. There are plenty of good things you can do with your time, and studying boring stuff, for me, is not one of them.
Okay, good advice. So what do you say, Thomas, to really make the best out of your education as a student? What is your advice to the students?
Well, you should, as mentioned already, make an effort to get a good, inspiring teacher. You may not have so much influence early on in your training, but if you later on continue in university, it's important that you choose a mentor that you sympathize with and that you respect, and where you feel sympathy and that your mentor is good.
Is that if you have a question for the Nobel laureates,
what we should do to get more Nobel persons?
Thank you to get more Nobel Prize winners. What would you say, Thomas? Do you have any advice?
Yes, I'm sure we all have advice on that point. Some advice has to be to the government. Research does cost some money, and you have to provide good funding for scientists and for science. Not all of that money will be well spent, but some of it will be extremely well spent and lead to no progress, and that will help create an international profile for India.
So, okay, so more money for research, that is very important. And also for good education, I guess. Okay, thank you. So, do you have something to add to that, Rich?
I would say one other thing. Usually the people who make the most progress in science are young people. By the time you get to my age, it becomes increasingly difficult to really make big contributions because I think I know too much already. And young people are not scared to take risks. They're not scared to ask questions that many of us older people would say, no, we know the answer, that's silly, you shouldn't do that. And so I always advise young people to take risks. Ask why people think something one way, and if you're not satisfied with the answer, then test it for yourself. Very often you'll say, oh, what would happen if I did this? A teacher will say, or a mentor will say, oh, we know what happens, but maybe they don't know what happens, and maybe you can go ahead and do an experiment. So I think it's very important for young people to get involved in taking risks, and don't listen too hard to the older people, because we don't know everything.
Okay, good advice. Thank you. Sara, do you have some?
Hello sir, my name is Riva Fernandez and I have a question for Professor Richard Roberts. If given a chance to live your childhood again, what changes would you like to bring in your life?
Okay, well, first of all, I prefer if people just call me Rich. I don't like all this Sir Richard Roberts stuff. So just call me Rich if you have to call me something. I don't think I would do anything differently. I had really what I consider a very good childhood. I grew up in a poor family, but my parents were supportive of what I did. They let me do a lot of stuff that otherwise better educated parents might not have let me do. I got on very well. I did well enough at school. I wouldn't have wanted to do anything better. And luck played an enormous part in my life, as it will in your lives too. I think we often don't appreciate the importance of luck. Luck happens to everybody. You have a lucky break and you should take advantage of it. And I had a number of lucky breaks in my life, one of which was to do my Nobel Prize winning work. So the one piece of advice I always give is, when lucky things happen to you, take advantage of them. Don't feel bad that you were lucky and your friends weren't, because everybody has luck, and if you don't take advantage of it, then there was no point in having it in the first place. So look around, always think about luck. But I wouldn't change anything, because I pretty much guarantee if I did, I probably would not have been as successful.
Very good question and very good answer. I think Thomas wants to answer too. So, yeah.
I would add something to that. Famous French scientist Louis Pasteur said, in science what you need is luck, but also prepared mind. Many people may be lucky and they don't understand that they have been lucky. So if you find something quite unusual or something, pursue it. Perhaps it's your piece of luck.
And I wanted to know your opinion as to what qualities could be act as equipments for me to carry out any research-based activity in general.
So who wants to start?
Well,
Rich?
I would say You have to find something that you're really passionate about, something that you just love to do, that you will do whether you get paid to do it or not, that you go to bed at night thinking about it, wake up in the morning thinking about it. When you find this activity, whatever it is, you should make a career out of it, and this will be what you should pursue. But I think this is something that no one can tell you. You should do this, that, or the other, and you shouldn't let people tell you what you should do. You should do what is within you that you're really passionate about, that you love to do.
Okay, thank you for that advice. And Thomas, do you have any advice for this student?
I think along these lines, I want to emphasize how important it is that you are really, really interested in what you're doing, because otherwise it can be rather gruesome. Science requires much work, and I like to draw the parallel, which is easier to understand for some people, with a top musician. If you want to be a world-class musician, you understand that you actually have to sit and practice your instrument very regularly and diligently for a long time before you get any good. And it's the same in science. You have to have some technical ability and feel for it, and you can achieve that best by being really interested in what you're doing.
Thank you. Very good answers. Thank you. Okay. Next question, please.
Good morning, both of your professors. I'm Arfat Nadim Mehman from Loyola High School, and I have a great honor to ask you this question, that if you make a discovery for the world, then how people of the world will understand that you have made a discovery which is useful for world?
Yeah, so if you make a discovery, how will you get the world to understand what you actually discovered? Was that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so do you want to start, Thomas? How can you explain if you made a discovery?
That can take quite some time, and you have to be patient and convinced that you're right. Of course, I can get carried away by something you have done, and you get attached to a working hypothesis that then turns out to be wrong. So you shouldn't spend too much time on something that turns out to be incorrect. But you have to stick with it for some time to convince yourself that you have really given it a good try.
Thank you. And what do you say about that, Rich?
Well, I would say one of the things that I always felt good about was that when I went to school, we were told within our classroom and taught within our classroom how to make presentations to people, how to communicate with people. And I think it is absolutely crucial to learn how to communicate with people in such a way that even the most complex issues can be told, can be taught, can be conveyed and shared with everybody. And a lot of scientists think that what they do is so complicated that it's really too difficult for anybody to understand, and they tend not to take the effort and go to the extent to do it. And I would tell you of something that I've found very useful. I tell a lot of my students this. I give them something called the grandmother test. And I say what you need to do is to be able to tell your grandmother what it is you do in the laboratory every day or what you do at school every day, and get your grandmother to a point where she understands exactly what you're doing or what discovery you've made or what is going on, to a point where not that you feel, oh, well, she understands it, but that she can go and tell her friends all about it and actually have it be accurate and then boast about how good you are because you made this discovery. When you get to that point, then you know you've learned how to communicate to people. But I think communication is something that is so important, and it's something that we as scientists, many of our colleagues, do not take the time to do it, or they're not very good at doing it, but it's something that should be taught. I think it's something that should be taught in school, because throughout your lives, you have to communicate to other people. You go for a job interview, you have to make sure that the interviewer knows how good you are, and you have to be able to communicate well with them. So communication, and it's a skill, it can be picked up, anybody can learn how to do it, but it does take time, and it's something that I think is very well taught in schools, and should be taught in schools.
Thank you. Wonderful. I wish all scientists of the world were listening to this. But you are, of course, the future Nobel laureates, all of you, so you will be able to communicate what you explored. To my ears, education for all. That's very good. Thank you. Okay, let's go to the next question, Sara.
Good morning, one and all. My name is Samriddhi Desai and I am from Ravindra Khedkar Jnana Mandir. My question is for both the laureates, that what made you all curious to let this discovery?
What made you curious and to make this discovery that you made? So, do you want to start, Rich?
Well, in my case, we were actually looking at the process of transcription, the way in which RNA is made from DNA. And we wanted to do something and ask a question that everybody thought they knew the answer to. At the time, we knew how transcription, how RNA was made in bacteria, and it was assumed, I would say by everybody, that RNA was made in exactly the same way in eukaryotes throughout life. It was a time in molecular biology where people thought they had done all of the basic work and knew what was going on. And we just wanted to prove that. And so this was what we started doing. We started looking to see how RNA is being made in an animal virus. And very soon we got a result that really didn't make sense. I had designed an experiment. I thought it was a wonderful experiment. My postdoc did the experiment and didn't get the expected result. He got something else. And so of course I said, well, you messed up the experiment, you better go back and do it again. And so he did it again and got exactly the same result. And so I said, well, look, why don't you let me do it and I'll show you how to do it properly. And so I did the experiment and I got the same result. And at that point, we knew that there was something going on that was not in the textbook. Something here was to be discovered. And so then we spent the next year or so following up on that to find out why we didn't get the expected result. And that led to the discovery of splicing. And I think this is, it's typical, this is what you do. You have some preconceived notions about what's going to happen when you do an experiment. It doesn't work. If you can show that technically you did it properly, then nature is trying to tell you something, there's a discovery to be made.
Thank you. So it must have been so inspiring to be in that moment when you really explored.
Yeah. Well, and it was, but the interesting thing was, and we told everybody, oh, there's something interesting going on here. They didn't believe it. They all said, no, 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 this can't be right. And so this is the time where you really have to be persistent. And even when people tell you that you're wasting your time and you shouldn't be doing this, you have to have that confidence that you know yourself that what you're doing is good and is correct.
Yeah, thank you. Thomas, did you have a similar experience, or how did it happen for you?
Yes, I did actually. And to discover something like which did, or I did, you have to be a reasonably good experimentalist. You have to know in chemistry or in biology how to work at a bench and do meaningful experiments. You can't just learn that from sitting in front of a computer all day. You got to go out and do some laboratory work, which some young people find even a bit old-fashioned. I don't, because that's where the real new excitement comes from, the unexpected results and the new developments. My own experience was that I was working on nucleic acids, initially on RNA, which is the other nucleic acid molecule. And I found that when I tried to study how this molecule slowly unfolded, it decomposed only, it just degraded. in long experiments. And everybody expressed disbelief about this. I had contaminated my samples with some factor that destroys RNA. There are many such factors, including on your fingers, or that there was some other problem. And I really had to consider that I had done the experiments myself, and I knew I was a good enough experimentalist to think that I am right and all the other people are stupid. And it took some years to convince them that that was the case.
So that's a great feeling. I am right and all the others are stupid because they can't understand. So I'm very happy that you stood up for these results and really convinced everyone that it was right.
It's also important to have a mentor that lets you do that.
Yes.
Yeah, you have somebody to believe in you. Yeah, that's important. So shall we take another question?
Hello, I'm Faiza Sheikh from Carmel Harder Secondary. My question is, I recently studied something on bacteria. It's bacteria under the sea in the hypoxic areas. So another thing what I read about is bacteria that treats cancer tumors. So tumor is an area where oxygen doesn't reach. So can't we use these bacteria which are underwater? And they're actually being used to generate electricity just to cure these cancer tumors in the hypoxic areas. Because the medicines don't go to those tumors, it's only the hypoxic bacteria.
So I am actually too stupid to repeat your question. So can you do it again and a little bit slower?
Yeah, I can do that.
So, yeah, and louder.
Okay. So there's a bacteria called Shivanella underwater in the hypoxic areas. It's being used to generate electricity by pricking platinum electrodes in the hypoxic areas. And there's another bacteria, soil-dwelling bacteria, that treats cancer tumors in the hypoxic area of the brain. So tumor is a place where oxygen doesn't reach, so we are using this bacteria, the soil-dwelling bacteria. But what if we try and use the bacteria, the Shivanella bacteria, under the sea to cure cancer tumors? Does that work? Because even they can survive in hypoxic areas, so that means they can enter the tumor.
Thank you. Very interesting question. And don't ask me to repeat. Rich, can you?
I can do that.
So, if I understand what you're saying that Shivanella bacteria are being used to create electricity, and that they grow in a hyperoxic environment. And when you have a tumor, it would be good if perhaps you could take these bacteria and provide a non-oxygenated environment, some environment around the tumor where there is not very much oxygen, because these bacteria are using it all up. And would this cure the tumor? Is that what you're trying to say?
So, what might be
So let me take a crack at that. So I know a little bit about Shivanella. I work on bacteria. I love bacteria. Shivanella are rather an interesting bacteria. But when you've got a bacterium that will grow in one environment, it sometimes won't grow in other environments. And I've no idea whether Shivanella could grow inside the brain. You were interested in the brain, I think. We don't know if it would grow inside the brain, but that is an experiment that could be done. It may have already been done, but that's something that actually you could probably do by maybe getting access to mouse tissue, mouse brain, and asking if Shivanella is able to grow on it. If it is, then at least the first part of what you want to do would be doable. Is it likely that you could then use that in order to cure a tumor? That seems to me less likely. But again, if you don't try some of these things, you will never know. I think more often than not, what would happen is the bacteria, if it would grow on brain tissue, would grow on normal brain tissue as well as on the tumor tissue. And so if you wanted to try to create an anoxic environment, one in which there was no oxygen around the tumour, you probably would have to make sure that the Shewanella didn't have access to all of the brain tissue. And that might be rather complicated to do. But it's a good question, it's an interesting idea. I'm an old guy, I don't think it would work. You're young, maybe it would.
My question is to both of you all. So, what were the difficulties faced by both of you all while doing the discovery, and how did you all overcome that?
Can you please repeat the question and speak a little more slowly?
Okay. So, what were the difficulties faced by both of you all while doing your discovery, and how did you all overcome your problems?
So, what were your biggest difficulties, and how did you overcome those difficulties when you made your discovery? Thomas, do you want to start?
The difficulties, as I mentioned, it takes a while to learn that most of your ideas are useless or wrong, and you get attached to your ideas, and you have to have a flexible mind to put aside what is not right. But occasionally you stumble over something interesting, and then you have to trust your intuition, what is right and what is wrong.
Thank you. And now I hear you talking, but now is not the time to talk to your neighbors, so please listen up now. Thank you. And, okay, so Rich, what would you say to that? What was your biggest difficulties and how did you overcome them?
Well, I'll mention one difficulty that doesn't relate directly to my discovery. It relates to the time when I first moved from being a postdoc and got my first job at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory. And I had some ideas ahead of time of what I wanted to do there, and I started to pursue these, and I thought I was going to develop a new method for sequencing DNA. And I started working on some enzymes called restriction enzymes, which are enzymes that take DNA and cut it at very precise points into small pieces. And I thought, by knowing where those cuts were taking place, that it would be possible to sequence DNA in this way. But what happened was that it turned out that the enzymes that were doing the cutting were themselves so interesting that I just wanted to work on those. And this caused some consternation from Jim Watson of double helix fame, who was the head of the lab where I was working. And he kept telling me I was wasting my time and I shouldn't be working on these enzymes. I should be working on sequencing DNA that he had in mind. But it turned out that everybody was interested in these enzymes because of their ability to cut DNA into small pieces. And they just became something all of themselves, a topic of interest all of themselves. And so I was constantly being told by my boss that I shouldn't be working on these things. And the rest of the world kept telling me, well, we want more of them. Where do we get them from? And at the time, the only place you could get them from was my laboratory because we had a collection of them. And people used to come to meetings and they would come down to my lab, they'd sneak out of the meeting and come down, and they had a tube of DNA in their pocket, and they wanted to know, did we have something that would cut it? And it occurred to me that this was something you could make a business out of this. And so I went back to Jim Watson, and I said, you know, we could make a business out of this. Why don't we start a business at Cold Spring Harbor, and we will sell these enzymes, and we'll use the profits from that to support the research at Cold Spring Harbor. Well, he got incensed. He didn't think this was a good idea. He didn't want me doing it. He said that there's no way you can make money doing this, and plus we're a research institute, it's dirty to be associated with commercial interests and so on. And so he wouldn't have anything to do with it. But fortunately, since I knew that this was a good idea and it was something that would work, I found a gentleman, an entrepreneur in Boston, and talked to him, and he'd already had a similar idea. And we joined forces. I became his advisor, and the company I work at today, New England Biolabs, is the product of that. But this was a very difficult time to be working in a research institute, doing research, with your boss telling you, hey, I don't want you doing that, you shouldn't be doing it, you're wasting your time, and so on. And I think one of the things, I've never been a particularly good listener, to be honest. People tell me to do things, and I usually want to do something else. And people tell me, don't do this, and I think, well, there must be something really interesting there, so I want to do that. And fortunately, this trait that I have of being obstinate or stubborn, or this paid off well in this particular case. And eventually, when I left Cold Spring Harbor and I went and moved full-time to Biolabs, Jim Watson admitted that he had made a mistake and that he should have listened to me when I suggested we start a company.
Thank you. So it's a balance to listen to your teachers or your boss and also pursuing your own
Gut
path.
is important.
Yeah, okay. Okay, Ulla, next question.
How would you cope if a certain discovery you made, like Alfred Nobel, was taken the wrong way and someone used it for something bad?
Once you have made an interesting discovery, you have to document your results by publishing the results in the literature as a whole. If you work for a private organization, you may not have to do that right away, but certainly in a university setting, to continue your work, you will need some research grants, and you can only get research grants if you show some signs of productivity. And once you have published your work, to some extent you lose control of it. There's no point in behaving like a child and saying, this is mine, don't use it in different ways that I don't like. It's just there to everybody's benefit. And people, I think it works really well. People take the example of Nobel, and he discovered dynamite. Well, you have to understand that dynamite is an extremely important and useful compound. Without dynamite, we wouldn't be able to build good roads and tunnels, and we would be much more backward than we are. That dynamite also can be used for creating explosives to attack other people. I don't think that's at all what was in Nobel's mind. Something can always be misused if you have the wrong kind of people that use it in the wrong way.
Thank you. Very good questions. You lose control over it in a sense when you have published it.
Once it's in the public domain, you lose control to some extent.
Yeah. So what's your take on that, Rich?
Well, I mean, I agree. As soon as the genie is out of the bag, as it were, as soon as someone knows about a particular result, then you do lose control of what people are going to do with it. But I still think that responsible scientists will speak out if they see it being used for something that's improper, especially when it can be used for something proper. For instance, at the moment, I'm involved in a campaign and leading many Nobel laureates to protest the anti-GMO movement. You probably all know about genetically modified organisms, GMOs, which have been a tremendous boon to agriculture. They're very good in almost all situations that we know about where they've been used. They do not offer particularly safety problems that one should be concerned about. And yet, a group of anti-GMO people often who claim to be scientists, are using science here in a bad way to scare people and make people believe that GMOs are dangerous, which they are not. And so what I'm doing at this point is to try to get the prestige, if you like, of the Nobel laureates and of other influential people to stop the anti-GMO movement from taking hold and causing damage and causing trouble. Here in India, I know you have a problem. You have something called BT cotton. BT cotton has been approved for sale and has been an enormous economic benefit. And yet recently, people wanted to make a genetically modified mustard seed, which would have been very helpful for Indian agriculture, and that was not allowed. And there are many instances, not just in India, but around the world, where the anti-GMO people are actively stopping the development of the very best agricultural practices that have come from science because they have found it to be a very convenient fundraising tool for them to be against it. And when you look at the scientific arguments they make as to why they're dangerous, they are just simply not correct. And I think this is an area where, again, good communication between scientists and the public is essential.
Thank you. And it's also, we are working very much with, like, to trust science and to know things for sure. And that's very important today. And education can do so much to make people trust in science. So, do we have another question from Sarah? Where are you?
I'm up here in the back. Maria maybe will ask a question.
Yes.
My name is Shraddha Par. I'm from Dr. K.B. Hediawal High School. My question is, who or what inspired you the most to enter this field of achievement?
Okay, thank you. So, she wants to know who inspired you the most to going into this field. Can you answer that, Thomas?
My own inspiration was an old pioneer of DNA research called Einar Hammarsten. He was retired, so he didn't have to come in anymore, but he came to the lab every day and continued his work because he found that so interesting. He was passionate about science, and he got totally absorbed in what he was doing. And I have told sometimes the story of that he started a scientific argument with me. I asked him a question, I was just a student, and he said, that's interesting, and he thought he had an explanation for it. And in the meantime, we were going out to the cold room to collect some material in the cold room. And he got so interested in what he was saying that he just stayed in the cold room and continued talking. It didn't occur to him that he could just have gone out and continue discussing outside. And first I thought he was a bit crazy, but then I realized he had one important thing on his mind, and then the fact that the temperature was different and so just didn't bother him at all.
Fantastic. Really a moment there. So Rich, did you have someone that inspired you?
In my case, I had several people. One was a headmaster at my junior school who used to give me puzzles to do and really got me interested in mathematics. And then I ended up, my father bought me a chemistry set, I got interested in chemistry, went to university to study chemistry. But while I was at university doing my PhD, I started reading outside of chemistry because I was thinking of other things to do. And I read a book by John Pingrue, who was a Nobel Prize winner, about the origins of a subject called molecular biology, which is really all about the molecules of life, and this subject about DNA and RNA and proteins and how it all gets made. And by the time I finished reading that book, I knew that this was what I wanted to do with my life. And so when it came time to get a postdoc, I went to a lab where I could do molecular biology. And I think this is something that I think all of you can benefit from. Don't just read the books that you're told to read by your teachers or your parents. Go out and find books that maybe are in areas totally different from anything that you would normally read, and see if you find something that's interesting. Because I think you never know where you hear someone talk, or you read a book, watch a television show, and you suddenly realize, wow, that is what I would like to do with my life. And that was the moment that I had when I read this book by John Kendrick. And I have to say it was not a particularly good book, according to John Kendrick and according to the critics. Because when I wrote this story in my Nobel autobiography, he wrote to me and he said that this was the nicest thing that anybody had ever said about his book. But nevertheless, this was what it took. So it doesn't have to be a wonderful book, just one that will inspire you and get you interested in something that you might otherwise not have thought about.
Thank you. Very good advice. So just don't read only what your parents or your teachers say to you. Also read something else and listen to the persons that inspired you. So where's the next question? Do you have something for me, Sarah?
Excuse me. Ma'am, can you tell me about the regeneration of the lost limb? The research on that, because I read it on the internet. I don't know if it's true or not. They experimented for like orangutan or something, and they just cut out his hand, and then they, in the laboratory lab they made another arm and just fixed it to it, and it was working, it seems. Is it true, ma'am? Because the net sometimes talks a lot of false things which you should believe.
Can you repeat that question again?
Okay, sorry, ma'am. I was a little bit fast, like.
Yeah, a little bit slower, okay?
No, ma'am. This gentleman who has said that you have to make it short, so I said it a little fast. Okay, ma'am. It's like you lose a limb, but you can replace your limb in the lab, it seems, by just growing that limb, then it's attached to that person or the animal who has lost the limb, which I read on the internet. Is it true or false?
True or false, can you replace a limb that you lost with a new one that has grown? Was that the question, Thomas?
I think the answer is no. I'm trying to keep the answers short also.
Positive note, in some lower vertebrates, it's actually possible if a limb has been lost that it will grow back again. This doesn't happen in man, and it's an interesting problem. Can we do this in a certain kind of frog, for example, but not in man?
Okay, so short answer, no, and long answer, maybe later. Okay, so maybe you will be the ones that discover how this is being done. So don't trust everything on the internet, right? Okay, next question.
While we wait for the next question,
Yeah.
do you all know about this site called Snopes, S-N-O-P-E-S, on the internet? Because questions like that, you can actually get a pretty definitive answer to by going to Snopes, which is a really well-researched site that has answers to questions like that.
Oh, good advice. Write that down if you didn't get it, Snopes. Okay, next question.
Hello and good morning to both of you. I'm D'Souza from Damodar High Secondary School, Parada, and my question is, why is your area of scientific discovery important for the ordinary citizen of our country?
Thank you. So, why is your discovery important for the ordinary citizen in our country? The discoveries you made, how is it important?
In my case, we found out that DNA is damaged more frequently than what was believed before, and it has to be repaired. Repair of DNA damage was known to occur before or after radiation, but it was not known that it occurs all the time. And this probably influences aging and old age disease in interesting
Okay, thank you. And Rich, what would you say? How does it benefit ordinary people? And I think you're talking too much right now, so please listen up. Thank you.
Okay, so in my case, the discovery I made was really a very basic one, and all of the effects on society are really indirect until last year. And it turns out that if the human body makes defects when it is doing this process of splicing, of putting these split genes back together, that can lead to problems. And one problem is a disease called spinal muscular atrophy. And this disease is one that your spinal cord does not form properly. And typically, if you have it, between the ages of 2 and 4, you die. Well, just last year, therapy, not a complete cure, but a therapy for this has become, as a result of my work, actually as a result of a postdoc who worked with me many, many years ago. He pursued in this field. His name is Adrian Craner, and he showed, first of all, what the time to change. But I was actually rather fortunate that because I worked for a company when I won the prize, I didn't get dragged out to do a lot of fundraising for university, and the company got no direct benefit because I had won a Nobel Prize. And so my life continued research-wise, pretty much the same as it always had. The only bad thing that happened academically was that I had a grant renewal in with NIH, and I heard later, and it didn't get refunded. And I heard later someone from the study section said, well, he's got a Nobel Prize now, he doesn't need the money, which I thought was a little unfair. But fortunately, because I work for a company, they fund my research. But I think the most interesting thing that happens as a Nobel Prize winner is you get asked to do a lot of things that you otherwise wouldn't do. You get to meet a lot of people that you otherwise wouldn't meet. And so I've been inducted into various societies, one of which was the American Academy of Achievement. This is a society where lots of people who are well known get inducted. So many of you may have heard of Harrison Ford, who was in the movies a lot in the US. He got inducted the same year I did, so I got to meet him. And I've met an awful lot of people that I just would never have met otherwise. And this can be very useful and very helpful if you want to get help on something or arrange to get help on someone or another. And one of the things I particularly like is being asked to join in events like this, where I get to talk to young people and hopefully to have some sort of influence on young people, maybe inspire one or two of you to do something really outstanding with your lives. And also we have the opportunity of making statements about things, because before you got the Nobel Prize, people tended not to listen to you. But you get the Nobel Prize and all of a sudden people start to pay attention. This means you've got to be a little bit careful about what you say, but on the other hand, you do have this bully pulpit in which you can hopefully try to do good things with it.
Very good, thank you, Rich. And Thomas, how did your life change after you got the Nobel Prize? Was it some change?
Well, as everybody in my situation there would know, you get lots of invitations and demands on your time that weren't there before. And you can pick and choose, so it's your own fault if you don't use those invitations to the most profitable and interesting way. Of course, it's very nice to be asked your opinion on all kinds of things, but trying to keep your feet on the ground and realize that even if you have got a Nobel Prize, doesn't mean that you're an expert on everything.
Okay, thank you. Very humble. Another Nobel laureate, Torsten Wiesel, he said to me that most of us who get Nobel Prize in science, we are Nobel Prize winners because we have spent very much time in the lab. So maybe sometimes we are asked about things that we shouldn't say something about. But he said then I can work for really good things and say some things about education and democracy and peace and things, and people will listen. So I hope you all get inspired by this. I think we have time for the last question. And who is this? Please.
Hello, sir. My name is Komal Chandana Tambe and I am from Mahila and Uttara English High School. My question is, which are the other topics on which you would like to research on?
Okay, you mean the topics that they would like to do some more research on, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so what are you curious about making more research about, Thomas? Can you say something?
Yes, human aging. What happens when our bodies slowly wear down, and can we devise methods to slow down this or hinder it? And as I said, that is the goal of that is not eternal life, but it's comfortable old age. If you all could live till 90 or 100 years old with very good quality life and mental facilities, that would be a good thing.
Thank you, Thomas. And Rich, what would you do?
Well, I'm actually just starting a new research institute in China on something called the human microbiome, and that is the bacteria that live with us, and without them we cannot survive. And there are so many questions about how these bacteria work, what they do, how they interact with us, and I think here there are opportunities to do some fundamentally new approaches to medicine, and I'm particularly excited about that. And so that is an area that I've become very interested in the last year, and last 2 or 3 years. And I think that there are going to be some major discoveries to be made here. I'm not planning on making them. The Institute is going to have a lot of young people in it, and I'm hoping some of them will make some of these really interesting new discoveries. But I think it's a really interesting new area, and one that is not widely appreciated yet.
Thank you. And Thomas, you want to say something more?
I would add one thing to that is the research can be quite expensive, and some things that you might be interested in, how to cure brain tumors, for example, may be beyond the capacity or financial ability of a student. But what is really a fascinating work out there is microorganisms, bacteria. It's much cheaper and faster to study properties of bacteria than tissue cultures or animals or human beings. And there are a lot of fundamental knowledge about our life that we will learn from bacteria. So that's a good topic of study that you can achieve even with very modest resources.
Okay, thank you. So then we are soon going to finish this session, and I think you have been superb and asked so many good questions. You were really well prepared.
Difficult to continue doing, but if you are interested in what you are doing, just plow on with it.
Thomas Lindahl, thank you. Please, Rich, do you have some advice for our students?
I always say, find out what it is you're really passionate about, things you love to do so much that it becomes a hobby, and make that your career.
Thank you. Richard Roberts. And to you, all school children here, I'm so glad that you would come to us, and I hope this was a lesson that you will really save in your heart, and that you will be inspired and go and do really good things in your future. And I want to give you something to our guests. Do we have because we usually hand out gold medals of chocolate to our guests.